Welcome to the Swike Podcast, the only podcast that shares the stuff you didn't know you needed to know about jobs, careers, and life. The Swike Podcast, the stuff I wish I knew earlier.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Swike Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier podcast. We're here with our new guest host, Mai. Mai, how are you doing today?
Very good. Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome. And she comes to us with a bit of a background in marketing and some other things that we'll get into in terms of life's challenges. But I'd love if you did a little bit of an introduction, introduce what you're doing now, and then we'll get back to what you were like as a kid. So what are you up to these days, Mai?
So I operate a foundation that I started, that I co-founded, and I'm also a freelance in media strategy. So I'm working with advertising agency, and that's my whole career, working in ad agency. I've been doing this for like 20 years.
Sounds good. So there's a long history to that. And I love if we kind of rewound and said, well, what was Mai like as a kid? What are some early childhood memories, fond memories, hopefully? What were you like as a kid?
I think I was born in Montreal, and I think I was an upbeat kid. I was very competitive. So my mom put me in a swim team when I was young, and I think I really enjoyed that. So I did that, and I did judo at the same time. And I just wanted to win all the time. So I remember that I'm a very competitive kid when I was younger, and it's still the same thing when I'm a middle-aged lady. I'm still competitive in some stuff. Board games, anything, I really get into it. And I think I really had a good childhood. So I was born here in Montreal, but I'm Vietnamese, and my parents came here a year before I was born. So I was raised in a very typical immigrant way, where my parents told me that education is super important. And my father was a pharmacist in Vietnam. So he wanted me to be a pharmacist when I was growing up. And my mom was an English teacher back in Vietnam, and she didn't want to pursue that in Canada. But my parents both really wanted me and my brother to go in health science or engineering, but more for me to become a pharmacist. And at one point, I remember my father said, if you're going to go to university in pharmacy, I'll give you a car. But I never got a car. So yeah, I did not go in health science. That was I think that was kind of a disappointment to my parents, because they really wanted to ensure that we have a secure job, and they knew that being an immigrant, you want your kids to have that financial security.
Right.
And I think they were worried that I was going to something completely different than what they had envisioned.
Right. Yeah, typical immigrant upbringing. Like I've heard of like the deal or no deal. Deal is like doctor, engineer, accountant, lawyer, were the types of things. So that was an expectation. And was your brother older or younger? And did he end up?
He's older. He's older. So he's a year older than me.
And did he end up paving the way for health sciences and engineering or something?
No, he is an engineer, so he did do the right thing. But I did not. I had no interest. I wasn't good in science. I was good in math, but besides that, I did not enjoy chemistry. I'm not good in biology, physics. I still don't understand it. So. It was pointless for me to go in the health science. But what I discovered when I think it was in second grade or third grade, I was really good in presentation in front of the class.
Okay.
And when I knew that I was good, because kids were telling their story, their presentation a certain way. And I was able, young enough, to pick on, oh, this is really good. He did a joke here. She over prepared. She's just reading her text. And I had this like, oh, I'm going to find a way to make my presentation better. And at that point, I'm like, oh wow, communication is something that I'm good at. Soft skills is something that I'm good at. But well, my parents didn't say anything about that. They or even the academic, they don't prone you to be good in soft skills or communication. It's more
Right.
sciencey
Sciences.
stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd love if you talk a little bit about that journey because obviously you realized that at a young age, but the expectations are a little bit different. So how does one navigate from like health science doctor? Because your brother went the engineering, so at least he was taken care of. So that's kind of why you were pointed down the health sciences,
Yeah.
also pharmacist path with a little bit of a
Yeah.
bribe.
Yeah.
But what was that conversation like? I guess growing up, or when did it actually start to happen? What was it more still in grade school, high school, or how did that transition into
I
the
think it
business side
was
work?
in high school
Okay.
when I was getting better in presentation, and my mom is a tiger mom, so she always saw my report card, and then she would see where I would excel, and it was always in oral presentation and
Okay.
not so much in science. And so she was open enough to to know that science was probably not going to be my path.
Okay.
And she told my dad, she said she's really good at oral presentation. I don't know what type of career she's gonna get, but we know it can be science
Mm,
because look at her report card. And I studied, like, it's not as if I didn't care about my grades. I did study a lot, but it does not compute.
right.
And so I think my mom, in around, I don't know, 15, 16, she kind of knew that I was going to go into something else. And she was a secretary at the government, and she would talk to other people, and she said, well, I don't know, maybe journalist is something that
Mm,
my could do. So she asked a bunch of people, uh, friends of colleagues, and do you know anybody that could talk to my, and at a certain point I got to talk to somebody that I did not know, a perfect stranger. She's a lady in like her 40s. I was 16, 17,
okay.
and I met her, and she told me what it is to be a journalist and how the media works, or how she studied communication when she was at university. So that was my first step towards communication and marketing. But that was really my mom that had that had the decency, and she was very open to it. You know, she did not force me into something that she knew that I wasn't going to be happy, and I wasn't
Right.
good at it either. And she saw that there was a potential somewhere else, and she was the one, honestly, that paved the way to me. So she was the one that was hustling to find any type of contacts that those people can mentor me and get me in another field that she didn't know anything about.
Sounds good. And were there many other conversations with different people in different walks of life, or is it really just that one that kind of catalyzed? Oh, like maybe your mom was thinking about like different people. Oh, maybe Mike could try this or this and that. Were there many other conversations?
I think it was only that lady
Oh, wow. Okay.
that made me realize, oh, there's something else than being a doctor or pharmacist, or things that my family only knew. And yeah, I think that was the first milestone for me, is realizing that actually there's something else out there. But at the same time, my mom would say, there's no Asian in the media. There's no
Right.
Asian in communication. How are you going to pave your way through it? But again, I think it's because I was competitive as a kid,
Mm,
and I'm still am. So I told my mom, don't worry about it. I'll find a way, and I'll be successful. I find my own way, and people will see it.
sounds good. So walk us through a little bit about that journey. So you enrolled in university. Did you pick specific like media advertising type programs, or more on the journalism side, or what was the decision to kind of pick that path?
I studied in human resources and marketing
Okay.
because I found out that uh, journalism was a lot of writing, and I
Mm,
wasn't that good in writing. But what I really like was talking to people, and I loved like interactions and human psychology. So that's something
mm,
that was very interesting to me. Whether you're studying in human resources, and then you have to deal with employees' problem and see through their eyes what they're going through, but see also as your company what they're trying to do in terms of values and um, trying to be with the employees. And there's the other thing that is marketing, where you're trying to sell something, you're trying to sell a product to an audience that may know you, may not know you, and so how you grab that attention. So that to me was very appealing. So I did a BCom in marketing and human resources.
that's awesome. And I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about kind of that process to think about like I wasn't good at writing and these other areas. Was that like over like an evening, a weekend, or over months or years? Or what
I
was
think
that
it was
process like to
over
figure it out?
years. I just
Okay.
found out that I'm not good at writing. I'm really good at speaking, but I'm not a great writer. And as a journalist, you have to write a lot and you have to write
Yeah.
fast also. And I knew that I think I've had trouble, not trouble, but I'm not a good writer as some of my friends would be. I have friends that are journalists and they could pick up on something and they would write and they would have no mistakes. And I'm still am. I'm not that's not one of my strengths. So when I was a kid, I think I found out in university. No,
Mm,
no, before university. Late in high school, I found out, oh wow, if you really have to be on top of the game in terms of writing, I like communication, but I'm not that good in writing to become a journalist.
sounds good. And I'd love if you walked us through like the university experience and was the human resources and marketing that aspect of it, was it everything that you had hoped and imagined it would be, or did you find different things and new things about yourself along the way?
Um, I think university, the fact that I was underrepresented, I kind
Mm,
of knew that that was going to happen. And I did not know that it would become so apparent to me
mm,
that I was one of the few one of the few Asians in class. And in terms of s- school stuff, I think I did very fine. So I did have friends. I was involved in a couple of committees, but I always felt like a bit off, and I
mm,
didn't understand why. And I think one of the thing is, since I was a kid from an immigrant, and that was like that was 20 years ago. So I was going to university in BCom in Montreal, and the kids that were going there were all coming from fancy family, where
mm.
they would tell me, "Oh, what did you have? Where did you guys go for summer vacations?" And they're not bad, but it's like it's not the same upbringing, you know. They're, oh, hotels 5 stars, and
Right.
we went to a Club Med, and that's something that I don't know. Like, I know
Right.
some things like book stuff, or I like have my family gathering, but I was not coming from like a rich neighborhood. And so
Hmm.
going to university, being very white, and having those kids that had access to everything, like their parents were lawyers, bankers, and I'm not saying that my parents didn't have anything, but it's we were much poorer than what they had. And so for me, that was very apparent that I couldn't rely on the connections from my parents, because my parents did not have any connections in that field, and my mom told me about that from the get-go. She's not going to be able to help me once I get to to university and trying to find a job and whatnot because they don't have that contacts. But my
Right.
friends did. So that's something that was very apparent to me that it's going to be, as my mom said, it's going to be more difficult for me
Right.
to pave my way in.
And what did you do with that information? My guess is that you hustled a lot and started making your own connections and things like that. Is
Yes.
that what happened, or were there other things? Yeah. Can you walk us
Yeah,
through a
I
little bit
think
about what you did?
it's yeah. Well, I think after school, I went to travel with a friend of mine, and when I came back, I really wanted to work in an ad agency. So what I did was I kept calling the VP. The VP asking, and I had a connection, but that connection told me just send the CV, the resume, and then they're going to send it to human resources because that's
Right.
the right way, that's the right process to do. You cannot talk to a random VP. You have to go through the proper route. And I told that person, well, if I'm gonna go through that proper route, I'm gonna be number 522A.
Right.
So I need to talk to the guy. That's gonna be the person that's gonna be able to hire me and to say yes or no. And then, mind you, I was like 22. I had nothing to lose. So I kept calling the VP every day for weeks. And at a certain leaving messages. Hi, my name is Ma. You don't know me. I'd like to be an assistant in your team. I think I left like 30 messages and he
Wow.
didn't call me
Okay.
back. And of course he didn't call me back. I was nothing. And at a certain point he picked up the phone and I said, "Oh, hi. I did not know that you were going to pick up your phone." And he said, "Yes, what do you want?" And I said, "Listen, I just want to have an interview with you. It's going to take 15 minutes, 10 minutes, whenever you want." And he said, "Okay, come and see me tomorrow. You have 10 minutes before lunch." And
Hmm.
that was that 10 minute that I had to seal the deal and to like pitch in 10 minutes. It was more than 10 minutes. But then I got the job. And I think from that moment, it spiraled to more connections and having a bigger network. But I wasn't afraid, to be honest with you, from being ridiculous, or people finding me, "Oh my God, she is so intense." It did not bother me at all. I knew what I had to do in order to get through. And so I did what I had to do.
That's awesome. And was that the one and only person that you called, or did you leave messages for like I don't know, every single VP at every
No, that
single
was
ad
the
agency?
only time. That was the
Wow.
only
Okay.
agency. That was it was really that one where I wanted to go in, and I didn't care how long the hours going to be or my pay. I just needed to have a first job, somebody that like a first real job, and it was like the top agency at the time.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad that I did it. And when I think about it, I find that it's very intense for a 20-year-old just calling you randomly, leaving you 30 messages. But I get that if I would see it and I have somebody who would call me, I would say, wow, that person is really motivated to have that job. She would
Right.
do. She's ready. She's eager and she's ready. She's hungry, and so I think honestly, I think that's why they hired me. They saw
Right.
that I I was hungry for the job, and they knew that I was going to work hard for it.
That's awesome. And maybe we'll do a deep dive episode into like the pitch and how you prepared and everything and how you sold yourself. And well, obviously you were the ad and marketing person for yourself, but maybe
Yeah.
we'll go through that. But I'd love if you shared a little bit more. Okay, now that you worked so hard and hustled to get this job, how was that career like? And then obviously you had some challenges along the way a little bit later on. But if you can walk us through like the early parts of your career.
Yeah, I was an assistant, for I was a media strategist and I didn't know anything about media. So you have to work a lot. It's a lot of hours too. And had a lot of friends in the advertising agency and teams. And then somebody said, and I wanted to have a promotion. So I was an assistant for 2 years. And after a year, I really wanted to have a promotion to be a strategist and not the assistant. And I told my boss, and I told him, "Oh, I'm working so hard, and how come I'm not having a promotion yet? It's been a year." And he said two things to me that really resonated. He said, one, uh, don't be a grasshopper. When you're going to do that job, we're gonna give you that title. One, two, nobody cares if you're working a lot. And that it dawned on me. I'm like, what do you mean nobody cares that I'm working a lot? And he said, everybody, look around you. Everybody's working a lot. So you
Right.
have to show the management that you're better, or what's your forecast, what do you want to accomplish. But just saying I'm working a lot, everybody's working a lot. That's not something that, maybe you're working a lot because you're not very organized. Maybe you're working a lot because you don't get things done fast enough. So working a lot, it's not something that you should celebrate, or that you should say. It should be, what did I accomplish? What is my objective? What's my projection? And did I meet those objectives? And if I didn't meet them, what are the things that I need to do in order to get them? And so that conversation very early on in my career really helped me to take the next step and to show the management that if they were not going to give me the promotion because X, Y, and Z, then they would lose an employee and somebody great, and somebody that could do X, Y, and Z.
Sounds good. So you basically again pitch yourself again for the
Yeah.
promotion, and moved up to the next
Moved up.
level.
Yes.
And then that's kind of circa what year you started
That,
stabilizing the family. And I'd love if you got into obviously the
yeah.
challenge in your life, the cancer diagnosis. If you can
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that process, would be awesome.
And so I was close. So I had a kid. She was 3 years old, and I was married at that time. And my boss, the president, said, "Well, I think you have everything that I think you have everything to become the next VP of the
Mm,
agency." And I was 32, and that's really, I didn't want to become the president. I really wanted to become a VP,
right.
and I was just so happy. And I was pregnant also, of my second child. So my second child was, I was pregnant 15 weeks. So it's about a little bit more than 3 months. So
Okay.
and I had a flu that I couldn't get rid of. So I went to the doctor, and I did a routine blood test just to see if the baby was okay. And I found out that I had blood cancer. I had
Wow.
leukemia. And I found out in the maternity ward. So it was really my gynecologist that kind of knew that something wasn't right with my blood. And I was being told by the hematologist and the oncologist in the maternity ward, when other women were giving birth. Well, I was giving my death sentence, and
Mm,
I had to terminate the pregnancy, in order to survive. So from that morning when I left home saying bye to my daughter, to my 3-year-old daughter, I had no idea how life would change in a split of a second. So
wow. And if you're open to sharing a little bit more about like how you dealt with that, because obviously in the morning it's like, bye honey, we'll see you later, and then oh my
yeah,
goodness, this as you
so it
might have
was it
aptly put it,
was
like kind of a death sentence.
it is a death sentence, and it's something that you don't see also when you're healthy, when
Mm,
everything is going well in your career. You're only 32, so you don't expect those kind of death sentence. Like from a second you're okay, and then suddenly you don't have your baby anymore, and then you're about to die, and you're diagnosed with cancer. And so from the moment that I got my diagnosis, I couldn't go home. So
Mhm.
the Monday I got my diagnosis, the Tuesday they were preparing me to cease the pregnancy for the abortion. On Wednesday I had the abortion. On Thursday I didn't have anything, and on Friday I started chemotherapy in isolation. So in isolation meaning that I was in a hospital room by myself. I could not leave. People could
Wow.
not come in. Only doctors and an adult wearing a mask as if somebody had COVID. And I couldn't see my daughter for I think it was 2 months, 6 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah, and I did not know at that point, honestly, if I was going to make it or not.
That's very intense, and I'd love if you can share it. Well, obviously it's got a bit more of a happier ending there,
Yeah.
but kind of the whole a little bit of the struggle, and then more. Was there like a turning point that kind of said, you know what, I'm gonna make it. I'm gonna get through this. Is there a point
Yeah,
like
and
that?
I think it's, again, I think my parents, since they are the immigrants, they have such a resilient way to face adversity. I think
Mm,
they somehow in their education they transfer that to me, and so um, I saw that, well, the cards are being dealt. There's nothing that I can do at this point, so just have to accept it some way, and I did after a while. And so I went to being sick, having that diagnosis, to being in remission. And that remission lasted only 10 months because I relapsed. So cancer came
mm,
back. And that time, that it means that chemotherapy doesn't work. And my doctor told me that I needed to have a bone marrow OS transplant. And I didn't know anything about transplant at that time. And I was 33, 34. And they said, well, we need to look at your brother, is if your brother is compatible with you, because it needs to come from this approximately the same DNA. And so, since
mhm.
your brother is Vietnamese also, and he's from the same family, we're going to test him first. But he was not compatible with me. And so they had to look in the worldwide bank of donors. There was 25 million at that time, and nobody matched me. And I was really upset. And I told, how come nobody's matching me? Do I have a special DNA or something? And they said, there's a lack of diversity. And so
Mm.
there's more white donors. And since you're Vietnamese, you need to have a Vietnamese donor. And so unfortunately, there's no one for you because there's not enough ethnic donors out there. And I couldn't believe that because of the color of my skin, um, I wouldn't have a fair chance
Right.
as other Caucasian patients. And that for me was honestly so difficult. That was more difficult than the first time that they told me that I had to go through the abortion and told me that I had cancer. The second time that they told me that I relapsed and I couldn't find a donor because I'm Vietnamese,
Wow.
it's enraging. It's so sad. It's like you just cannot believe and you cannot grasp that is happening.
That's again another difficult situation, and it's quite interesting that that one is even more difficult. So obviously, again, we have a little bit more of a happy ending where you decide to do something about it.
Yeah.
So walk us through a little bit about the next step of it.
So I decided that my career and what I do as a living would help me. And all those contacts that I had in like 15 years, 20 years was going to help me to find a donor. And so we
Hmm.
launched a campaign. Well, I was still in isolation at the hospital, and the campaign was called Save My Duong, to help me find a compatible donors. The media was really interested. I had billboards all across Canada. That was like in 2014,
Hmm.
and that did not give me a matching donor, but that gave 5 other patients a
Mm.
donor, and I was lucky enough to have an umbilical cord blood from a mother from the States that matched me. And then later on, when I was infused with that cord blood, I told myself, wow, I just can't go back in the ad world and just do what I did, and I want to do something more. And so co-founded Swab the World Foundation, which is essentially a foundation where we want to increase the diversity of donors, because people of color and even young people, they don't know anything about stem cell donation. So there's so
Right.
much that we can do. And I use a contact in the ad world, um, and in the media world to help me propel this story.
And that's amazing. And obviously it's still going on. There's much more growth and awareness that's needed. And I'd love if well, we can follow you along in your journey, obviously. But if you could uh, share a little bit of what you're up to now. So obviously you run this foundation, you're freelancing and marketing, and if you can share a little bit of maybe some Swike, the stuff I wish I knew earlier, to young Mai in various times of her life. So there might be the younger stages where I don't know, you had to discuss with mom and dad about not being a pharmacist, or maybe the later ones, like the first or second diagnoses, maybe a couple of those pieces of Swike. But if you could share some of that advice to your younger self, what would you share?
I think I would tell my younger self to not to be shy, and not to overthink things that others might think of you. I think
Okay.
I often told myself, oh, don't do that. What are the others going to think? Oh, they're not doing that. Why should I do that? And so I think but I would tell myself, don't fear too much, just do it. We often are way too much in our heads, just overthinking, analyzing everything, and then we're not able to push forward. And I would tell my younger self not to worry so much about the other outcome, and just go with your gut, and just actually do it.
Right. That's awesome. And for me, what comes to mind is, and it's very prevalent in the Asian culture, but I'm sure in a lot of others, like the concept of a face, right? Doing as you're supposed to be
Yeah.
doing, and not sticking out. But what I heard in your story is that, well, you are you, right? And you also had the benefit of your mom, who realized, you know what, she's not going to do so well in science. So even if we want her to be, that's probably not going to be a great path. So she had the foresight to kind of find some people to kind of help you out, even though she wasn't necessarily able to help you in that. But at the end of the day, it's doing and really being you, finding what makes you unique, what makes you potentially better than other people, and latching on that. And that fear, you might feel it, which is fine, but do it anyway. I think
Yeah.
that's what I took a little bit about that. Are there any other tips or suggestions that you have for maybe kind of like the diagnoses that you had, like getting through those? What are some advice that you have for those ones?
It all boils to the same thing of doing. I think when I got my diagnosis, um, it's like there's no words how that you feel when you have that kind of diagnosis. But then again, it's a lot of resilience when you see, well, they gave me lemon, what can I do? So you can sit and just think about that all the time. Or you could try to close that will happen again. I mean, fear and that sadness and that anxiety will always come in a cycle in my life, and that I know that I'm gonna have to deal with. But I think at a certain point you have to say, all right, I do have cancer. Is it going to tell me what I really am, what I really can do in my life? And I think you're trying to move on, but there's nothing that you could do. There's nothing that you honestly can change. You cannot not have cancer right away. It might take more time, but you have to, again, you have to take your time, but you have to get up and walk, because you
Yeah.
can't just be on the floor forever. You can be on the floor for a while. That's okay. But at a certain point, I remember in my head that I had that voice that said, "Okay, get up. It's time to get up now. Just get up and get up and take one step at a time. But you have to get up at a certain point."
Sounds good. And what comes to mind is a bunch of quotes. You had the reference to getting handed lemons. So that's obviously when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. So it seems like that you made a lot of lemonade along the way. Another quote comes to mind is, "For there is nothing good or bad, and thinking makes it so," right? So you took your reality and just made it, well, I choose to turn this into something positive, because you ended up saving 5 people and multiple people afterwards with the efforts that you had. And final quote was, I think it's from Byron Katie, where she says something to the effect of, "You can argue with reality, and you'll only lose 100% of the time," right? So it's the acceptance of, like, I have cancer. Like, I can't change it, at least at the moment, but I can do something to move forward to potentially go into remission later on. So it's the action of doing something and moving forward is something that's important for folks to think about, instead of the dwelling and the wallowing and all that sort of stuff that doesn't necessarily help. So I think that's a lot of great guidance. And as we close things off, we'll hopefully have you back for another episode. But where can folks connect with you, find out more about you, and what are some future aspirations that we can look forward to hearing from you?
Future aspiration is really with Swab the World. So we're a young charity. We're only 4 years old, but we're doing so much. So I would say just follow Instagram and LinkedIn, but mostly Instagram. Our account is Swab the World. We have a great ambassadors, university students. We give conferences, and I think I just want to see more of it. And once we do more conferences, in all types of university or community or community organization, I think the word will spread out, and I honestly think that we're going to help more each other to have each other's back when there's cancer, and we know that we're going to have a potential match.
That's awesome. And we'll obviously put all of the links in the show notes. And again, thanks so much, Mai, for sharing your story. And hopefully we'll have you back for a future episode to do a deep dive in some of these other topics. So thanks for joining us, Mai.
Thank you, Lukey.
Take care.
Take care.
Thanks for joining us on the Swike Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. If you like the podcast, please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you found this podcast. And if you can give us a review, that would be very appreciated. Feel free to contact me on LinkedIn at Lukidanu, Lukidanu, and the same on most social media platforms. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks. Bye.